Hey guys, it's Nailbiter, and this is a replay I had with the Object 140 on Prokhorovka in Counter. Now, I've posted a lot of proc replays on my channel, but I don't know that I've ever actually commentated over a proc replay. So in addition to discussing the replay in and of itself, I also wanted to add commentary to this replay just to talk a bit about the map more generally and why I like it so much. Now, I suppose I should preface this entire commentary by mentioning that arty is the one thing that can and will consistently ruin this map. Anytime there's two or more high tier arty on each team, you have to be very careful, and even in this replay, watch how many times the Lorraine arty on the enemy team shoots at me or in my direction before he gets killed. It's a little ridiculous. And I mean, luckily I don't really get hit, so it's not it doesn't have a huge impact on my game, but arty focus on this map can be infuriating, and it's the one thing that can ruin this map for me. All that being said, however, when arty isn't as much of a factor, this map is probably one of my favorite maps in the game, if not my favorite. Of course, the obvious reason for this is that, unlike most maps in World of Tanks, Prok is one of the few that's much more vision-oriented as opposed to being brawling-oriented. On most maps, you have these isolated lanes that kind of force you to directly engage the enemy in front of you. But on Prok, there really aren't that many brawling opportunities. Just think about how many shots I take over the course of this replay where the tank I'm shooting at either isn't looking at me or is being spotted by someone else. And I don't know if you saw that scent. I'm almost positive, I'd be willing to bet that the arty shell that killed that scent behind me was meant for me. Lorraine arty was shooting at me the entire game. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that as long as you can control when you get spotted, excluding arty, you can essentially control whether or not the enemy has a chance to shoot you. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight about this replay. I think over the course of this game, I did a pretty good job of timing when to peek the mid-ridge and when to spot the enemies that were kind of opposite me on this ridge, and when to stay back and support the flanks. Now, it depends a little bit on what tank I'm playing, but if I'm playing a tank with any kind of mobility, even a tank destroyer, and especially if I'm playing a medium tank, I almost always go mid-ridge. I think the mid-ridge is the most important part of Prok, mainly because from this area you can get shots into just about anything that gets spotted across the entire map. And this is another thing I like about Prok, because there really aren't any other maps that allow you that same sphere of influence, so to speak, from any one area or position. I think the only map that comes to mind is Sand River Assault, because it has a similar kind of mid-ridge there where you can safely flex back and forth and get shots off, mostly from cover or from safety. As long as you have good situational awareness and pay attention to the mini-map and to when something gets spotted, if you're playing a med or a fast heavy, it's very easy to just move from side to side and get shots off, which is essentially what you see me doing for most of the early part of this game. Whenever something gets spotted, either in the forest, two-line, or on the hill, it's easy for me to just quickly react to that and move to a position where I can get a shot off. And then generally if there's a lull where nothing is getting spotted, that's when I might peek the ridge and see if I can get a shot off on one of the tanks on the opposite side of the ridge from me. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning about Prok is it tends to be a much slower paced map than a lot of other maps, and that's part of the reason that arty can be more successful on it, in addition to the fact that it's just a very open map without a lot of hard cover. But because Prok is so vision oriented and there are so many bushes and opportunities to take advantage of camo, you can't really flat out push on this map, so pubbies tend to be pretty passive and kind of tentative on this map. I think people generally don't have a good understanding of vision mechanics. And not only that, but people are usually very slow to react to what's going on around them and across the rest of the map. So because of all that, Prok tends to develop pretty slowly. I mean, in this game we're 4 minutes in, and there was a bit of action just now with that T-55A trying to push the two-line on the enemy team. And like we spotted the enemy 140, it kind of pushed up on the hill. But otherwise, relatively speaking, not that much has happened and not that many tanks have died. And what I like about this is that it tends to allow me to move around and work a lot more than on other maps. So kind of similar to what I was talking about before, I feel like Prok is a map where I'm able to influence the course of a game much better than on a lot of other maps. Of course, I'm playing in Counter instead of the standard mode, which is slightly different in that there's usually a bit more of a focus on hill and less of a focus on forest. But otherwise, the pace is still very similar and the map progresses in essentially the same pattern. So to this point, I haven't talked all that much about what's been going on in this battle specifically, but at least for the early part of this game, I didn't really like the way the game was going. I was worried for a while that our two-line would get pushed because We didn't have a scout passive spotting from one of those bushes, and it seemed like the enemy had a decent number of tanks there. But fortunately, it turns out none of the enemy scouts were on that side spotting either, and then when the T-55 tried to push a little while ago, he got killed pretty quickly. So I'm less concerned about the 2-line, especially because our T-49 is doing some active loops that will hopefully catch anything that tries to move up on that side. But the enemy is being fairly aggressive on hill. The 140 got spotted there not that long ago in a pretty forward position, and he's in a spot, or he was in a spot that was kind of difficult for me to get shots on. And the enemy has a lot of tanks in the middle, so they have a bunch of stuff that could potentially take out the couple of tanks that we have still on that 0 line that are trying to hold off the hill. We have a T-57 Heavy who's sat in the same grid square the entire game and isn't being very useful. And so I'm kind of concerned that we might lose those 2 tanks on the 0 line spotting the hill for us. And especially in encounter, losing complete control of the hill isn't good at all. Even in standard mode, if you lose hill, it essentially means that you can't do much at all on the entire eastern side of the map. But fortunately, these guys keep doing a pretty good job of spotting the 140 and Leo, so I'm able to get some shots into them. And this is the nice thing about the 140. It's got such good DPM and gun handling that it's really perfect for these kinds of situations. I think in my opinion, the 140 is the best tank for playing this area on Prok, because you can also peek over this ridge, and you've got good enough gun depression to get shots off, and good enough turret armor to really bounce most of what's going to be shooting back at you. So by taking out the Leo and pushing the 140 back, we've basically won control of the hill, and since our T-49 had died on the other side of the map, I wanted to do a quick active scouting run just to check the positioning of the tanks on the other side of the ridge, and also just to spot for my team. But those 2 tanks on the 0 line end up pushing much more aggressively than I was expecting, so once I saw that, since I thought it was pretty likely they would die, I wanted to take advantage of what they were spotting and hopefully get some shots off. But once I actually moved over here, I didn't really have any good shots on anything that was spotted back there. And the VK had kind of moved up into a position where he was cutting me off from crossing over and actually helping those guys out. So we lose our 704, but our Type 61 is still alive, and the 140 is a one-shot. And based on what they spotted with their kind of YOLO run, it doesn't look like there's anything else back there. So I'm hoping that the Type 61 can kill the 140. And once I spot the VK and kind of push him back and then do another active spotting run, I decide to just cross over because I know this M41 is the only tank left that the enemy has on the eastern side of the railroad tracks. And so I wanted to just take him out so that we had complete control of this side of the map. And I kind of meant to ram the M41, but I was a bit too focused on hitting that first shot, so I ended up just driving around him, and it looks like he kind of gave up anyway. So now after all that, my team is finally in a pretty good position to win. The one risk is if our Roombas get overrun, we could lose the western half of the map. So what I want to do now is try to get back into a position to support them. And I'm looking to see if I have shots on the 183 and the E75 who's moving up. Unfortunately, this VK is again pushed up into a spot where I don't really want to cross just right past him and take the shot on the off chance that, you know, I might still need the HP later. So I just put the one shot into his side turret and then drive away from him, making sure that I don't go into his line of sight. And I'm going to just go the safe way around, back essentially to the same area that I was in before. The Roombas are able to kill the E75 as well, so I feel like we're in pretty good shape at this point. The 183 is such a long reload that it'll take a little while for him to actually kill both of them. The only other thing I have to be aware of is the enemy does still have a Roomba who hasn't been spotted yet, but chances are he's just hanging back somewhere on the 2 line and won't be too much of a factor. So I take one shot, another shot on the side of the VK. I couldn't tell if he had shot there on our cap, so I waited a second, but once he backed up behind the ridge, I decided to just go for it. And our 57 and T-34 who sat in the same place the entire game are now capping out. And of course, this is the one thing that can be kind of annoying about Encounter is you sometimes get these quick cap outs. It can happen on this map, and it happens a fair amount on steps and mines. It's one of the reasons that I think that a lot of people don't really like Encounter. So I'm just going to rush up here thinking that we're going to cap them out. I put one shot into the VK, but I was actually hoping that he would go for the reset, so I decided to ignore him and let him hopefully deal with the cap. And instead I'm going to drive toward the 2 line and help the Roomba with the last 2 TDs. And it turns out the VK actually does get a reset, so now I have enough time to finish off the 183 and Roomba. I'm full HP, so I don't have to be super careful about how I approach this, but the 183 obviously has the potential to do a lot of damage. and it's always difficult to spot tanks that are behind camo or behind bushes, so I want to be a little careful about how I approach this. But there, the 183 actually kills the Roomba on our team, so I know that he has a long reload, and I decided I'm just going to charge over the hill, put one shot into the 183, but once the Roomba gets spotted, I focus on him, and so I get a nice ram kill on him. And now it's easy for me to just get around the 183 before he reloads and put the last 2 shots in him to finish him off. So this replay is just about done. It was a bit of a longer one, but hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and the commentary. Hopefully found it helpful or interesting in some regard at least. So there's the end of the replay, and here are the post-game stats. I got an ace tanker this game in the 140, just under 8,000 damage and about 1,500 assist damage, so a pretty good overall game. And I thought this replay did a good job demonstrating how I typically approach Prokhorovka. I think this is one of the maps that I tend to do pretty well on, so hopefully this video is helpful in some regard in improving how you play this map, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.